a bit inconveniently, I'm not feeling very well, but I'll try to channel my positive energies for the talk. So here we're going to talk about attackers, but slightly different connotation. For me, an attacker is somebody who provides the technology or the infrastructure to deliver attacks, generally at scale. I'm Luca Allodi from TU Eindhoven in the Netherlands. I'm the head of the emergent threat analysis group. And there we're fairly obsessed with these kind of attackers. So not really all of them, right? There are generally two broad categories. The right-hand side, I don't like them too much. They're a bit boring. I mean, they are very important because they represent the threat scenario, very important to study them anyways. But when you look at the technology that they provide, it tends to be not very credible. Stuff that sells maybe for $4 or $10 or $20, and it promises that you can get any Android device on the planet with that thing. I don't really believe you. And there is nothing there about what's actually the thing doing. There is another kind of attacker that I like to call Dimitri that just goes and full on and really delivers apparently the technology, right? And there, for example, this is a vulnerability exploit from some time ago, but I really like it because it says it's compiled over different architecture, it tests it over different operating systems, tells you the execution time, tells you how many of the security defenses in Windows it avoids. It's certainly a very different sort of scenario, right? And my point here is that Dimitri, the one on the right-hand side, wants to play and sell the thing that costs $5,000 in a place where, and that's what Akerlof told us a long time ago, right, is in a place where he can be very clearly distinguished from the guy on the right-hand side. Otherwise, the buyer will have no reason to spend $5,000 instead of $40,000, right? So, and that's an important question, because if you just look for hacking forum online, you get hundreds of results. Even if you just focus on the Russian cyberspace ecosystem, you get dozens and dozens. And the question is Dimitri really, Dimitri, not that guy, is it really everywhere? Or does he, I'll go with he, okay, choose more carefully where to go? So in Eindhoven, we've been studying these ecosystems for some time. We developed a bit of a gut feeling about it, but eventually we thought that, well, if we try to formalize that a little bit, we started thinking about these communities as tech enterprises. After all, that's what they do, right? They provide an environment where customers that are, the sellers or the buyers can play into, and these different environments have different properties. Features that maybe deal with how the escrowing is done, or how the seller verification is done, or how the conflict management is executed and controlled within the ecosystem. So we thought, well, if we think of these as sort of value propositions, if you want, of the business model of a criminal forum, it's the time I still have, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and we try to map that out. I mean, we use the business model canvas, which is a bit simplistic, but it's we think a good start. And what we started doing is that from the access that we have over a few dozens of these communities here, we selected 23, some big, some small, some segregated, some not segregated. But we try to sort of map out a little bit what these features of these markets are, and see how do they look like within a business model canvas. It sort of tries to describe the business model behind those communities where my attackers go and sell their stuff. And once we map that out and we create a bit of a framework, and here I have the WIT group and the CHAF group of fora, the forums. A rough definition of what WIT group is, there is more in the paper, is linked on the website, is places where we could find very strong evidence that technology that mattered, that infected millions of users worldwide and was actually traded, and we found evidence of that trade. Whereas the CHAF group is where we could not find any evidence, and we tried very hard, okay? It may be with other communities this changes a little bit, but once you start labeling things out, a few things emerge, and this is still a bit preliminary, but so one thing that struck us is that if you actually run the numbers, the forums in the WIT group, they look much more alike among themselves than the forums in the CHAF group, meaning that there seems to be like a set of features that the WIT group always has, whereas the CHAF group doesn't really have. So it looks like there is one recipe. And of course also the WIT group, the feature set, is distributed differently from the one of the CHAF group. But so if we look at some of the ideas, I mean, the what makes it a forum part of the WIT group is that it should be segregated. It's difficult to get access to it. There is some kind of vouching or some kind of barrier to entry. Stricter seller verification procedures, and one that we found to be interesting is that admins seem to not be involved in the trade. Their only business with the community is they run the community. They don't sell stuff in the community. So maybe that speaks about perverse incentives with the administration. So we use this for identifying a number of things, because then eventually we like to find the threats that matter and sort of obsess about them for a while. This is one of the latest one that we've been obsessing with, the Genesis market. Many of you may have heard of it. It was a very large-scale global operation. We identified it in 2018. In 2019, the Europol investigation resulted in 2023 with the takedown of the market, and we published in the meantime. But the way in which we could identify this market so ahead of time is because we had this sort of calibration mechanism where we could find, okay, this place looks interesting, it looks credible, it looks innovative. Now, as Dimitri would say, if it was, oh, what's this? It's a singer. Oh, 2 minutes. Who sang? This is Vremenia ani Menialitsia, which is a rough Russian translation of times they are a-changing. Who was the singer there? Bob Dylan. Yeah, Louis. So if Dimitri was him, that's probably what it would be saying, because these things are changing now. This ecosystem is evolving quite a bit, and what we're finding is that it seems that it's moving away from forum-only communities, where most of the trade is still there. It looks like it's getting up in the level of abstraction, so it's more about services and more about data, and less about the hardcore technology like the vulnerability exploits or the malware. And then since that some things are being outsourced or move away from forums, where lots of additional interactions between the buyer and the seller happen over Telegram or Discord or these other platforms, they look very differently, and they work very differently from forums. So that's an opportunity because it adds more context to what happens afterwards, and it allows us also to, with some limitations, to track these things. So we're looking at that in more depth. But I think that if we can calibrate how this ecosystem plays, then we could do something for threat intelligence and things like this. One last second, if I have it. If you're interested in attack data, or you're interested in seeing how security analysts study other data, we set up a security operations center. It's which is an infrastructure that monitors the security of other infrastructure. It's a commercial enterprise, but we actually use it for research. It supports research. We run it at the department. We actually did something very similar to what you, Alessandro, presented before. We actually have an infrastructure to micro-measure how analysts perform their investigations. So if you're interested in this kind of data, you talk to me and I'm done. Yes.
Thank you very much for this very good Mexican food. Very much appreciate everything. So for about 20 years, I've been studying the effects of political violence. And specifically, I've been interested in the determinants of variation in terms of whether governments are effectively coerced into making concessions to terrorists, or whether governments do the opposite, whether the terrorism is politically ineffective. Maybe the government will even go on the offensive and dig in its political heels. And so I thought that I understood this very, very well, this basic question of, when will terrorism work or not, in what ways, etc. And then Operation Al-Aqsa Flood happened on October 7th, the Hamas terrorist massacre. And what I saw in terms of the reaction, in terms of its effects, completely went in the opposite direction of all of my understanding and predictions. In fact, this very slide used to be rewritten, and it was like, I was saying, the title of it was like, why Operation Al-Aqsa Flood is going to like backfire on Hamas, and that hasn't happened. And so what I want to do in this brief presentation, which I'm winging, is I'm going to show you what the research landscape had to say about the determinants as to whether or not terrorism works. I'm going to show you why Operation Al-Aqsa Flood seems to deviate from that corpus of information that I've been involved in for 20 years. And then I'm going to take a stab at trying to resolve this puzzle as to why Operation Al-Aqsa Flood seems to deviate. So this is me doing field research during the second Intifada in the West Bank. And that was really shortly after 9/11. There wasn't that much good research on terrorism, and it was widely assumed that people turn to political violence because it's effective. Essentially, it's just categorically effective. We're dealing with rational utility maximizing entities, and so that's why they use violence. However, as you can see, there's a wall being built up in the West Bank in response to Palestinian violence during the Second Intifada. And I started thinking to myself, I can't really count this as a success. Doesn't seem to be successful for the Palestinians. I spoke to a lot of them. They all said that they were really pissed off with how things were going. They didn't view themselves as success stories. I registered that, but then I thought about the first Intifada, which was more successful. It led to the Oslo Accords. And I was trying to think, well, what's a big difference? Well, the difference was that during the first Intifada, the violence was directed against government forces, whereas the second Intifada, the violence was much more indiscriminate. So I concluded maybe that's why it doesn't work effectively. In graduate school, I began publishing the first large-end studies as to whether terrorism works or not. And what I did was I disaggregated campaigns in terms of their target selection. And what I found is that when the violence was selective and it was directed against government forces, it tended to account for pretty much all of the political successes. Whereas when the violence was indiscriminate, it tended to backfire on the perpetrators politically. Then came Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Very indiscriminate violence, right? It was massive in scale, overwhelmingly directed against civilian targets, and it was brutal. This was exactly the kind of campaign that I would expect to have backfired. And in some ways, you could say that it did. There's a picture of Gaza. In West Bank, things have also been exacerbated in some ways. But in other ways, I couldn't help but notice that Hamas has succeeded. I just pulled this from a Google search, took a picture of their images. You look up Hamas or Palestine, and you see all of these celebrations, unprecedented support for the Palestinian cause. And what's more, if your dependent variable, if you will, is the recognition of Palestine, these are just a handful of countries that have recognized Palestine since October 7th. And the UN has come out. And clearly there's all sorts of international support for Palestine. And it does seem like Israel may have to cede territory. And so I don't think the media was wrong when it says, that the violence has been strategic. This is across different political orientations. So I tried to think, well, why are they so effective here? I'm running out of time. But there's a basic understanding in political contestation that to be effective, you need to appear to be moral. And militant leaders are very good at doing this, even after really big atrocities. For example, through credit claiming. What I find is that militant leaders are less likely to claim credit for attacks when they were directed against civilians. They don't tend to claim those. When they were against military targets, they're much more forthcoming in claiming it. And that way, retroactively, they can appear to be more moral. They can appear to be more moderate. And yet, so what I noticed was that, and this is obviously a work in progress, but you can see that the leaders of Hamas, although they did favor the civilian attacks, it did come from the top. After the attacks, they tried to deny it. The leader denies targeting civilians. Pages and pages like this, right? Where they say, no, the targets were not actually civilian. Well, the interesting thing is that I think that there's a bifurcation in terms of the signaling here. Whereas for Israelis, Hamas isn't confusing anybody. They know that the targets were in fact civilians. But for the international community, I think that it may actually resonate. I've been particularly interested in this odd phenomenon where people have been ripping down the posters of the civilian hostages, right? You've seen that in the West, right? Not far from where we're talking today. And I think that one of the reasons why is because those are civilians. And so what I've noticed is that there's a new dynamic going on where it's not just the leaders of militant groups retroactively acting in a strategic way for the advancement of the group, but it's sort of the broader international community which can also be party to this. And there is no research in terrorism studies, as far as I know, on how terrorism or militant leadership strategy extends beyond the group. And so that's an interesting area for exploration. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. My name is Miranda Bruce, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit, basically the opposite of what Luca was just talking about. Instead of talking about the online places that cybercriminals inhabit, I'm going to be talking about the physical places that cybercriminals can be found at a global scale. A little bit like Sunny as well, I'm going to be skipping over the finer methodological details. I'm a sociologist by trade, so I'm very happy to talk about the methodological details, but I really want to sort of succinctly summarize the study that we've been working on for 4+ years so we can get to the results. And so that I can tell you about the next steps, which I really would love some feedback on. Okay, so the focus, and I guess the motivation and the context for this work, is that we're really interested in the local dimensions of cybercrime. So by that we mean the kind of the human element. We're interested in why it is that people sort of get involved in cybercrime. We're also interested in cybercrime as an economic activity. Again, kind of echoing what Luca was talking about. What we do in this project is we specifically focus on profit-driven cybercrime. I'll have something more to say about that in a later slide, but we don't explicitly look at state-sponsored cybercrime attacks. It's all profit-driven. And so basically what we mean by cybercrime geography and mapping it is we're looking at the physical location of offenders at the country level. We're not counting offenders. We're not trying to create sort of a distinct population. We're just looking at which countries are the most significant sources of cybercrime. The big sort of theoretical sort of impetus behind this, and what I like to think of as the big brains behind this research, is my colleague Jonathan Lusthouse. So if you're interested in this kind of element, please read his book. That's my shameless plug. So as a sort of a quick, why would we do this? Which is actually a surprisingly common question when I present at conferences. First of all, if we know which countries are the most significant producers of cybercrime, we can direct resources appropriately to the countries that actually require it the most. It means that we can develop a global metric of cybercriminality, that's what we're kind of calling our measure of it, which is useful for research, but it's also useful for policymakers. And really the thing that I'm most interested in is better understanding the drivers of cybercrime and also cybercrime as a social activity, and something that can be kind of sociologically understood. And then given enough time and enough data, and assuming that we can kind of take these drivers and we can turn them into effective models, then we should, over time, be able to predict where cybercrime hotspots or hubs might actually arise in the future, if we know what's sort of creating the conditions for cybercrime hubs to appear now. Okay, now thinking about the kind of the context for the data. Locating cybercriminals, very hard. If it wasn't, then a lot of investigators would be out of a job. But the two kind of major sort of sources of data that are sort of have been used in the past to kind of map cybercrime are technical and legal and case study data. So the problem with these two data sets is that with technical data, so looking at where attacks are coming from, can't actually provide valid attribution at a global scale. So it can't tell you with the kind of required level of validity where the physical person is, at least not, again, at the global scale. And then legal and case study data, which looks at, again, sort of specific qualitative studies. It can't scale up. It's biased towards countries where cybercriminals have been successfully found and then prosecuted. It also biases against countries that are easier to study. So our solution to this problem was to create a data set based on an expert survey. And this is kind of what we decided was the best proxy for cybercrime offender location. So first of all, it establishes valid attribution of where cybercriminals are physically based, as long as the experts are reliable, which I'll talk about in a second. It's comparable across countries, it produces a metric over time, and survey data is easier to extrapolate and instrumentalize. So that's why we decided to do that. Talking about who our cybercrime experts are. So they have to be active cybercrime intelligence officers or investigators. They have to have at least 5 years of experience in the field, and they have to have a reputation for excellence amongst other experts who are recognized as excellent, which sounds a little bit circular, but what we did is we started with a core group of known experts that were a part of the networks of the research team, and we followed that by getting references for other top experts from them, but we also balanced against this by doing, for me, a lot of cold calls. I did an enormous amount of investigation, trying to track down who experts are across the world. We spent a lot of time trying to get experts that represented different regions. And we also did a few things, like we didn't recruit more than a few people from the same organization, or if it was a very large international organization, we made sure that we weren't recruiting from the same team, because to avoid a bit of bias in that sampling, where these people would be reading the same reports, talking to each other about this kind of thing, and then would sort of duplicate the results. So we designed the survey so that we could avoid as much bias as possible while still retaining a very high quality set of data. So the survey captures the level of cybercrime activity within each country's borders, the impact of the cybercrimes produced in each country, the technical skill of the offenders, and the professionalism of the offenders. And we captured that across 5 different types of cybercrime, which, after a few focus groups, includes technical products and services, attacks and extortion, data identity and theft, scams, and cashing out and money laundering. I'm just going to quickly show you what the survey looked like, and you can all admire my very fancy Qualtrics skills. But basically what experts did is that they, for each cybercrime type, they nominated up to 5 countries that they believed were the most significant sources of cybercrime. And then for each country, every single country that they nominated across all 5 categories, and it was nominating up to 5 countries. They didn't have to nominate countries if they didn't want to. For each of these countries, they then had to rate on a score of 1 to 10 the impact, professionalism, and technical skill. So we ran the survey from April to October 2021. We have since run a second survey in 2023, but I've got the data on my computer, I just haven't analyzed it yet. But in the 2021 survey, we got 92 experts to participate, so a 37% response rate. And this is the map that we have generated from our data.
Russia looks good, eh?
Yeah, oh yeah, no, it looks really good. And so that's the map. In interest of time, I'm just going to keep going. And then what we also did, so we were able to, basically the map was generated from experts nominating countries as significant sources, but with the other metrics that we recorded, we were also able to put together this index. So here you can see these are just the top 20, but basically with the scores that each country received, we're able to do some fancy averaging and weighting and come up with an overall score. Very similar to the Corruption Perception Index if you're familiar with it. Now, one of the interesting things, so that I should just show you the top 20. This is the top of the overall index. These are the top countries that were nominated, 97 in total, which is, and we have an index for each type of cybercrime. This is just the overall one. Now, key findings, which I'm going to rush through, 97 different countries identified, way more than previous studies, way, way more, which tells us that, and these are countries not just where cybercrime is present, but where it is a significant source of cybercrime. Small number of countries hold consistently high rankings. 6 countries appear across all indices. Cybercrime is not evenly distributed across the world, which indicates that it has a strong local dimension. And then a few other findings that I'm going to kind of go through so that I can talk about, this is sort of talking about the fact that different countries specialize in specific types of cybercrime, but also, so there are limitations, which I'm happy to talk about. Next up, we're going to be doing some analyses to figure out why certain countries are more likely to be cybercrime hubs than others. I also am going to squeeze in this very, very small thing. 24 hours ago, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner lodged a civil liability case against Medibank in Australia after a massive data breach in 2022. The OAIC got in touch with me to ask if I know anybody who would be a good expert witness for the case. If any of you think that you would be a good expert witness for the case, please get in touch with me. No, I'm done.
I've been an expert witness in Australia. It's weird.
Fun weird?
Yeah. It's weird. Ask me later.
Wear a wig in court to wear a funny.
Damn it, no.
Wig.
No wigs in Australia, sorry.
Can you wear a wig in court?
If you want to.
Let's let Ben talk.
So, hello everyone, I'm Ben Collier, and I'm here today to talk to you about influence policing. So the Influence Policing Project, this is a big project, a lot of people on it, well, not that many, but for British academia it's a lot of people. Me, a bunch of people from Napier, Cambridge, Strathclyde, and I'm from Edinburgh. So what is influence policing? It's a phenomenon we've been studying for the last sort of 5 or 6 years, since about 2018. It's a combination of 3 previously existing phenomena, which you'll all be pretty familiar with. So firstly, social marketing. Secondly, move of behaviourism into government, so behavioural science. And third, the affordances of digital ad targeting. Now, when these 3 things come together, you get government doing domestic digital influence campaigns to get public policy objectives achieved. So not political campaigns, not commercial campaigns, but actually getting you to do stuff that government wants you to do. Brush your teeth, go to the doctors, etc. And law enforcement are using this. We've got a bunch of examples we got from the Meta Ad Library. Thank you very much. And I'm going to talk about them. So there's a content warning for this. I'm going to show quite a lot of these ads. They are none of the images are gory or anything like that, but they do cover law enforcement campaigns, and they do show a lot of quite upsetting use of these infrastructures by the state. So I'm going to really quickly run through the background. So essentially, social marketing emerges in the early 1970s. You'll all be saying, well, isn't this just regular old propaganda that's been around for 100 years? Really, something different emerged in the 1970s in the West. So this is where the mass culture boom pours lots and lots of money into marketing, commercial marketing, and that gives government a lot of new tools to use those skills to do essentially behaviour change propaganda. So marketing things that don't have a product or price. Usually stuff like health initially, and usually for awareness campaigns. This is either making you aware of an issue, like you need to brush your teeth more, or alternatively, telling you to do stuff. Lock your car, buy a security camera, etc. So the police really took this up in the 1980s. Now, what we then see, you all know what nudge is, right? What we see across the 90s and noughties is a move of nudge theory, well initially behavioural science, then nudge theory in the noughties into these campaigns. So government stops simply telling people to do stuff, go brush your teeth, essentially, and they stopped doing awareness campaigns really at the core government. Instead, they try to incorporate psychological nudges, so using communications to change your perceptions and therefore change your behaviour indirectly. And then we get social media, right? So you move from being able to target simply, I'm going to put a poster in the GP surgery, I'm going to put a poster outside the police station. Now we can target this stuff very, very detailed ways, new forms of segmentation. And this means you can tailor different nudges to different people in different contexts. Take that together, what you get is influence policing, police communication campaigns that directly try to shape behaviour and culture of target segments of the population through information nudges, lots of it going on in the UK, in the service of proactive, essentially pre-crime prevention. Now, there's a lot of different models. This really starts in counter-radicalisation, which I'm going to show you some of. But then it moves. So once you see a reduction in counter-radicalisation, sort of funding and interest in after ISIS, a lot of these people end up moving into other areas of police work, so things like knife crime, cybercrime, gender-based violence. A lot go work for media consultancies. So I've presented on this here before, but this is a different presentation because now we actually know what these campaigns look like. Police Scotland gives us a lot of access to their behaviour change communications team, as did the National Crime Agency. And we also worked with the Home Office and we said, can you show us some of these law enforcement campaigns? And they said, no, they're national security classified. But then we applied to the ad library and they're all on there. So we're going to show you some data for that. We see a lot of different models. So I'll essentially go through some of these different models. So here we have, yep, you're going to see, so this is quite a small text, I apologise, but this is a 3-segment counter-radicalisation campaign delivered on Meta products. That is a charity, but it's actually essentially run by the Home Office. So this is a counter-far-right campaign that targets people in the far right, young men. And we can see what the government's using here. A lot of interests are in gambling, online casinos, paddy power sports betting. We're also excluding interests. So we don't want people that like gender-neutral pronouns. We don't like people that like Greenpeace. We don't like vegan nutrition, etc. But we do want people that are into sport and in these British towns. So you overlay that, you get a nudge segment. But that's the young man. What's his mum up to? Let's target her with a different communication. So this is a different product, same advertiser, but it's part of the same campaign. This time we're liking people who like fine gardening, Caribbean cruises, Waitrose, and live in Wiltshire. And this is the one that I actually did ask the security services about, if it was okay to show this. The third segment targets the person's dad, and this is different content. Again, it's been tailored for people's parents, so dad. Interests, so you might not recognise, so Ricky Gervais, for some reason, Britain's Got Talent, but we don't want people that like Ben Shapiro, because you don't want to target the dad if they are actually also radicalised. You want someone who's going to be able to help the young man. Wow. Someone who likes soccer, and this is the slightly wibbly bit. This list of locations, it's very long. I've actually taken a lot out of this. These are tiny towns. Those are 2 of the towns, East Kirby, and this is All Hallows, All Hallows on Sea. These are tiny. Where does this list of towns come from? Well, a number of these towns were the site 6 months after this campaign of serious far-right riots, so we think it's almost certainly coming from an intelligence product. So what this is essentially what Prevent has turned into in the UK. There are a lot of these kind of active campaigns running around counter-radicalisation, but they don't all look like this. You also get these types of campaigns, which are quite different. This is a Police Scotland campaign. These campaigns, so David mentioned this idea of difference between like behaviour change at the moment and broader cultural brand campaigns. This is an example of this. This targets young men who are friends of people who are likely to commit gender-based violence and gives them tactics to basically talk their friend down and challenge their behaviour. But it's using a lot of different types of targeting. So straight people, people in a relationship, and various other keywords. And so I think it's quite interesting to see the police using these sorts of approaches. Thank you. I won't go too much into the impression count stuff, but it is interesting. So this is the one that I have the content warning in for. It is really upsetting. So this is situational deterrence. So instead of risk profiling people, you're risk profiling situations and putting up nudges. This is a campaign targeted in 65 different segments at asylum seekers in Calais and in various number of small towns you can see here on the French and Belgian coast. This targets these people using essentially proxies for ethnicity and religion, and it targets them basically with these very harsh fear-based nudges, most of which I won't show. But this one is essentially you let it see in Persian. There's also pictures of military drones, of dogs attacking people, etc. So they're really trying to use these nudges to dissuade people from crossing who are... I think this is a really awful campaign that's extremely ethically dubious, as you can imagine. Also, you can see it's had huge overthrow. So an audience size of 1,000 people to 5, but huge numbers of impressions, about 30 to 35. I will show you this fun one. This is Counter-Terror Police. You get this if you go in one of these postcodes. There's a bunch. Where's GL 50? 9? That's GL50. Right. So it's around high secure buildings in the UK, so it delivers you a situational nudge. So I'm going to show two more and then I'm going to stop. This is a coordination campaign. This is a really traditional police campaign. Come and chat to our police officers about hate crime. But they're using the ad infrastructure to target a group that is really the police have had trouble speaking to or getting in touch with. You can see here a lot of proxies for religion and ethnicity, Islamic dietary laws, pillars of Islam, Islamic fashion, excluding interests around gambling, and particularly, so Meta has deprecated, this category on Ramadan. I'll just very quickly do this one last one. This is a Secret Intelligence Service recruitment campaign targeting young black British people who go to non-Cambridge or Oxford-based universities. But we're interested in this location data. These are single postcodes in British cities. Liverpool L82. Where is Liverpool L82? That's Liverpool L82. It is 67.6% black British. So they're clearly going around Meta's restrictions on ethnicity-based targeting.
Wow.
I'm done.
Hi, my name is Anh. I'm a PhD student at Cambridge. So I'm going to be talking about the effect of a concerted effort by industry to take down hate and harassment forums. This is the work that Jane mentioned yesterday, and this is joint work with Alice and Ross. So we published this paper just a couple of weeks ago at Auckland, and Ross was the person who wanted to talk about this today, and I do have a plan to talk about another paper, but I will try my best to do what Ross wanted to do. So the forum we look at is Kiwi Farm. How many of you have heard about Kiwi Farm before? Well, half of you. So for the rest of you, Kiwi Farm is probably the largest forum known for online harassment, where you can find all sorts of unpleasant content about cyber bullying, doxing, and a lot of information of users are reviewed on that forums. So this forum has over 1 decade of lifetime with over 15 million posts in total, and it had been used Cloudflare protection services for years until September 2022. There was an incident happened with a Canadian activist in London, Ontario, where it is believed that she was harassed by a forum member so seriously by a swatting incident, and then she started a campaign on Twitter in order to pressure Cloudflare and the other tech firms to drop the forums. And Cloudflare took actions very shortly, so it blocked Kiwi Farm, and in their public statement, it is said that they blocked the content because the immediate threat to human life. Then Kiwi Farm quickly moved to another service called DDoS Guard, which is a Russian-based one. But just 1 day after, DDoS Guard also dropped the forums, and the forum then moved to another platform, but it got blocked very shortly afterward. And it was not just about 3 of these tech firms, but many others also tried to block the forums, including some Tier 1 networks. And this is very extraordinary because we have just about 15 Tier 1 networks in the world, and 3 or 4 or 5 of them blocked that forums. And because this case is very special, we wanted to evaluate how effective this takedown campaign is. And our method is that we collected the entire forum data spanning over a decade, and the Telegram channel used by the forum users, because they tend to move to other platform when the forum was not accessible. And we also collect web traffic to the forums, and also the shared interest of internet users about kiwi farms. So here is our first impressions. So there was an unintended consequence. As you can see here, the shared interest of internet users and the web traffic to the 6 major domains of Kiwi Farm increased dramatically, like 7 times and twice higher than before, just right after Cloudflare's actions. That means more people are more interested in searching Kiwi Farms and also to visit the forums. And here is the forum activities over time, and you can see a very big drop here just right after Cloudflare actions. And the second big drop was after a tier 1 network blocked the forums. But eventually, after a couple of months, the forum recovered, and so this figures is until December 2022 when we submitted the paper. And at this moment, the forum activity is fully recovered, and it is even higher than before. So and then we asked the questions, where did the users move to? Well, they moved to Telegram, and here you can see a very big spike of activities on the channels, and you can see the scale here, it was even higher than the forum itself. Here is the number of posting on local farm, which is the primary competitor of Kiwi Farm. So we do see some drop here in sync with Kiwi Farm, but interestingly, users did not move to that forum, so they tend to move within their ecosystem. And here is the traffic to 6 major domains of Kiwi Farm. You can see here the traffic was to the main domain of Kiwi Farm dropped rapidly, and it was fragmented to all domains that were previously not used. And you can see that a very messy stuff here is when the traffic was fragmented. But eventually, after a couple of months, then the traffic returned back to the primary domains. So there's a lot of other things in the papers. So we built a network of users, of forum users, and we found that they were actually more connected after the takedown happened. And so we also discussed the details of industry response, and also the reactions of the leading community, when we found that they lost their interest quickly over time, just after a few weeks, and also the user discussion about the campaign tailed off very quickly. And so this very special case teaches some valuable lessons. So even with a concerted effort by a series of many tech firms, it may not be enough to shut down that hate community, and it can be quite challenging to do so, because one thing is missing, because the Kiwi Farm owners was not arrested. And for example, when the FBI took down a website, the playbook is that they seize the website, they arrest the owners, and they hope the combinations may work. But in this case, the forum operators was not arrested, and he was very technically competent. He tried many things to recover the forums. And we know from previous work that government actions may be less effective than a tech firm, because they need to go through all complicated paperwork, and they need to go through all legal procedures before seizing any website. So the questions here, open questions here, is that how effective law enforcement and government action could be in that case, for example. And I would like to spend my last word to say thank you to Ross, because he was the one who changed my life in many ways, and thank you, Ross, for all the inspirations, all the things he has done for the community and for the generations of students. And I have made a website. I collect all the public tributes of people that write about Ross, and with consent, of course. And I also collect some private messages by our department members, and I put them online. And because I I believe that many people, including myself, will learn a lot of lessons by reading through people's memories. And thank you very much.
Okay, so the first question from the serious panel goes to Vaughn.
So I've got a quick question for Luca. So again, great presentation from all the folks. So Sadia and I did some joint work, and it is a little bit dated now because of 2014. Like one of the things when we were looking at these online criminal forums, we were looking at like successful sort of communities of criminals and unsuccessful communities. One of the things that we noticed was like successful communities would have a lot more kind of cybercrimes that they specialized in, and unsuccessful communities have fewer. But we also saw scaling effects that unsuccessful communities wouldn't scale beyond like the Dunbar limit, and successful communities would scale very large. And when we did social network analysis, we saw small world effects. I was wondering if you were seeing anything like that as well.
Quite the opposite, I must say, lately especially. I mean, I recognize that that's where things started from. But now, in our experience, these communities specialize more and more. They tend to be extremely segregated. It's difficult to get in, and you need vouching from people who do the same kind of business, which has rippling effects on the kind of composition that, you know, the expertise within a community reflects. And that is translated into the type of services and technology that you find there. That is not true for all the successful communities. Some are still, as you described, like the biggest ones. But we find that the ones where innovation, criminal innovation, is really pushed through, plays the lion's share, is in these small communities where there are a bunch of people that tend to know each other decently well, or for long periods of time, and with some collaboration also apparently going on. And that's what leads to innovation, both technically and on the business side. So sometimes it's the business models that are actually innovative, not necessarily the technology.
The other two people that are studying forums are Ben and then Ben.
So yeah, of course, I've really enjoyed the presentation. So as you know, like a few episodes we've been doing research on like how you apply innovation theory to some of these marketplaces, and like particularly around modelling them as the startup ecosystem sort of thing. I'd be interested to know, given you've got this incredibly rich data, are you seeing any other types of the types of effects that we see in legitimate innovation systems, things like cluster effects, or people coming and starting to take on the role of like angel investors or mentors, and like, because I think this is a really nice framework for making sense of actually change over time and like where these things are going.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I don't know. It would be something to investigate in depth. But now that you mention it, I mean, that there are lots of community effects that sort of tend to self-select, not to select specific technologies and really push them longitudinally in time. So it seems that an important effect for example, a new business model, like it was the case for Genesis. It started around 2018. It started to be big around 2020. But if you follow its history in these places, particularly, as I mentioned, the smaller ones, where the people who can appreciate the technical quality behind the thing, there was a lot of momentum behind it. Yeah? So maybe that plays a little bit into what you're saying, but I think it's really open research questions there to look at it maybe together. Yeah? Wink, wink. Yeah.
Let's do it.
My question for study. So security advice, it's been a problem forever. And I know yesterday we were talking a little bit about like measurement. We don't have good measurement and mitigations. In that case, we were kind of talking about account compromise. And I was curious if you feel like any of the hate and harassment advice that experts were giving is something that we could even possibly do an experiment to measure efficacy, and if that would help them, or if that's like completely the wrong direction.
I honestly don't know. I mean, as you know, my focus is on qualitative work, and so I would be more comfortable working with somebody who understood that. This stuff seems very difficult to measure, and one of the challenges in measuring it, I think, is that people tend to focus on prevalence and not severity in that case, and then they overfit for, I think Samir and I were talking in one of the breaks, because I misinterpreted one of his comments yesterday, thinking that he was saying, let's go for, everyone's time is wasted with some of these security things, so maybe we should be fixing that. And I'm looking at people who are suffering extreme harm and think, no, maybe that's where the focus should be. And so I think that needs to be a consideration in the measurement, but I don't know. This is people always want us to measure this stuff. We've been working on it for 10 years. I don't know what the answer is.
I have two questions, one for Luca, the other one for Miranda. For Luca, I'm curious as to when you look at these forums and the ground network of humans, are there interaction or crossover with cyber weapons industry, commercial for sales, cyber criminal tools? I call them cyber criminal tools, they call them cyber national security tools. Are there crossover, are there suspiciously linked, like you
Sorry, can you define what you mean by weapon, please?
So there are companies that sell tools for police and authorities.
But you mean still for like surveillance or cyber in the cyberspace, not missiles?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Are there like transition of like vulnerabilities that are sold underground and you later find in those industries, or the other way around? Are there suspicious of people transitioning back and forth? I'm curious. So that's question for Luca. And question for Miranda. I like your research very much. I'm curious as to the limitation to your methods, because I look at the result and I find that one, the global south is very much missing from this, and two is, I can't reveal too much, but I can say that your list has overlapped with what I know to be hotspot of scams, but only maybe 20%. Your top 10, only 2 or 3 overlap with my top 10. So I'm curious as to maybe the methodology is language limitation or experts limitation, because the countries that I find missing between what I have in my head and what you put up is maybe countries.
Would you like
where
us to stop recording? So
no,
you
about
can
to
no,
say.
that's okay, because I'm not revealing anything.
No, I totally want to stop recording. So you can-
Up to you, but I just wanted to get your comment, like, maybe because it's hard to find experts that qualify to your level in certain countries, or maybe they don't want to respond. I don't know, I want to hear about it, because I'd love to, like, see if there are ways we can get more and more understanding of these, because part of what I do in policy org is try to talk to governments and get them attention on these bad actors, because they're causing grief on us as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Luca, do you want to go first?
Yeah, because I am interested in your answer too. I love the question, so I'll keep it short. No, the answer is no. These two ecosystems, they are completely separate. What they are in the cybercrime general global ecosystem is that they're relatively quick in picking up the occasional leak with the NSA, the shadow brokers, so this thing, and weaponizing it, but that's pretty much where it stops. Yeah.
So this is all the bit that I wanted to talk about, but totally ran out of my own time. So yes, this is the limitations of the survey. So clearly having reliable experts is crucial to our data. And we're actually quite confident from the kind of analyses that we did. We didn't find any strong evidence of any sort of major types of biases. We didn't find that experts weren't, for example, nominating or rating their own country where they reside in, or that they are a citizen of, significantly higher or lower than anything else. We also did a bit of an analysis about countries, people who belong to countries, and whether they systematically rated countries that would be considered enemies, higher or lower, and we have a sample size of 92, so the statistical power of our analyses is limited, but we didn't find any strong evidence of any particular bias. We also didn't find any strong evidence of survey fatigue, which was lovely, because if they filled out the whole survey completely, they would have nominated 75 countries and then done 3 Likert scales for each country, so it would have been a lot, and some experts did that. We also had a very high level of experts actually removing themselves from the survey. So we had a few instances of experts, they'd kind of go, and first of all, it was quite common for experts to go in and then they wouldn't fill out entire cybercrime category sections because they say, oh, I'm not an expert in that, so I'm not going to give you data on it. And we actually also had experts who got halfway through the survey and they said, actually, now that I'm going through, I'm getting less and less confident about my results, so I don't want to mess up your data. So we have all these reasons to believe that the quality of the data that we have is very high. But you correctly point out that so first of all, the survey is in English. The second time we ran the survey in 2023, we offered it in multiple languages, and I did, again, a lot of cold calls and a lot of translated emails to people to reach them, and I got no response. So the effectiveness of translating the survey into different languages, we believe, it appears to be a bit limited. Clearly, there might be something more that we can do to increase participation in the way in which we're doing that. But also, there's something about this particular population that means that they're probably the top experts in cybercrime attribution, intelligence, and investigation are very likely to speak English, not universally, and clearly we need more coverage from around the world. And so we tried really, really hard to get more respondents, especially from the Global South, and we were we totally failed. We got the lowest, one of the things on the slide was we have an overrepresentation of experts who are based in or describe themselves as residing in Europe and the US. And I think the lowest representation that we have was experts from the South American region, and we only had 3 out of a total of 92. So that is absolutely something that we're focusing on. It's something that we're finding really, really difficult to manage, and to really address, because one of the things that I've discovered through the hundreds and hundreds of emails that I've sent and calls that I've made is that these people, these experts, really don't want to be found. They don't want to be contacted. They want to, almost all the ones who took the survey are obviously quite committed to it, and they're passionate about what they do, but they're also very time poor, and they're very suspicious, even of academics. But for your final point about the lack of overlap, so first of all, I guess my first response to that is that the survey data is from 2021, so it is a little bit older, and I expect things may have changed a bit. But I don't actually expect that many of the countries that were nominated in 2021 would change that much from 2023, even considering, anyway, a few other things. But I would definitely like to talk about that more, and I think it could be a problem of experts, like geographical representation of experts, but there might also be something else going on about the particular organizations that we have access to.
I'm very curious because you just reminded me that your data that you present was 2021.
Yep.
I would be curious to see what more you find in 2023 because I do know of a change as well, but let's chat.
Yeah, and all
tell us, come on.
All of the data is open access, by the way, like 100%. All of the original data, all the coding that I did, apologies, it's very messy, but all of it's open access and anybody can use it and do their own analysis. So if you do, let me know.
You should fill out the survey.
I'm not qualified as an expert. The data that I have are from the one that she deems as hard to attribute. It's technical data. So that's why I want to see this one and then match it and so I can better understand.
Did you get the Spam House guys or the blog people or the Aaron anti-abuse people?
So I can't say exactly which organizations I've involved because it's part of our anonymity policy, but I know of all of those organizations quite well.
And did you have many Chinese participants?
Yeah. No, in the first survey, yes, I think there were 2.
I'm going to use my moderator's privilege and expand your question about the interaction between state-aligned activities and e-crime to max, because that's kind of your study. So what is the overlap between online criminal activity between state-affiliated and state, like the things that police forces do and the tools the cops use and the anti-terrorism tools and the terrorism tools?
No, I appreciate your getting me in, but it's not a good opening for me. I'm not sure.
Just
to piggyback off that question, go back to the survey, I was just wondering when you differentiated between types of hacker activity, you differentiate also in notoriety, how famous or how important they are in fighting crime as a service. So for instance, if you're asking specific researchers in a specific area, they're going to be looking at specific crews, or only reusing certain services that others have provided. So if you take Zeus or Game Over Zeus as a banking Trojan, that was written by one dude, Yevgeny Bogachev, Slavic, who was #1 cybercrime, most wanted at the FBI for still today, and who lives on a boat in the middle of the Black Sea. So I don't know how he fits geography. But and by the way, of course, has also cooperated extensively with SDR, and there's lots of documentation on that. So I was just wondering, when you're asking a security researcher, as we call it, right? Do they look at the particular crews, or do they take a look at that level as well? So those are different. Like the malware authors and the ones who deliver it are not necessarily the same. They also have different nationalities.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of answers to that. Firstly, we very explicitly asked our participants to think about where the offenders are physically located right now. And so that was, and the question about thinking about different kind of groups and the notoriety, that's kind of bundled into the question about the most significant sources of cybercrime. So that's kind of ends up being, it kind of gets lumped into that question. We do have some explanatory text that sort of explains what we mean by all of our categories, but this is another limitation that I was going to talk about, is all of the definitions and categories we use in the survey, although they're based on a number of focus groups that we conducted with experts, which then pulled them out of the survey pool, which made me very sad, but was very helpful. All of the categories and definitions that we use are contestable, and they're increasingly kind of elastic, especially as different types of cybercrime sort of get more associated with each other. So I think basically the survey is already quite long if you take it really seriously and you fill out each category. So we kind of have to, just purely by survey design, we kind of have to simplify things. And so I think it would be excellent to kind of get our experts to think about notoriety specifically as part of the significance question, but the survey will be too long. Is kind of our feeling about it.
Okay, I thought there was a long line. No, just one person. You?
Second one.
No, you're third.
Oh, I'm okay. Miranda, it's interesting you keep talking about kind of this idea that there's a global set of bad actors. We're kind of trying to map them globally. But one thing that phishing has really taught me is just how targeted it is, that one group attacks another group. So even though that may be the location of all the bad actors, I bet that long tail you're seeing is actually more evidence of who attacks who than it is like just incomplete knowledge of the different experts. And I'm really curious how much, especially as you start getting more experts from one country or one area, you're actually seeing side effects of just more local targeting between two countries or targeting a specific topic area in that space.
I think that's an excellent point, and that's kind of something that we're hoping to capture longitudinally. Because so this is a really, basically we created this survey as a starting point. It's step one in a much bigger process, and it's providing a measure that can be used, and it can also be critiqued. And I think one of the things that we really want to see over time is the effect of global events and also local events having an effect on which countries are showing up as hotspots for cybercrime activity. So I think that's something that we can record, and I think then the data is still quite valuable. It may just be that over time, what our data does and how it's useful might change.
I also have maybe a small follow-up to that. So in the context of the impersonation as a service, we're actually in the position of measuring which the target were of the attackers and what characteristics of those targets would drive up or down their popularity among the pool of attackers in purchasing specific profiles and not. Of course, unsurprisingly, they follow the money, but lots of, and so the States and parts of Europe were very popular, and interestingly, when there seemed to be an undersupply because of malware changes in the supply chain from the United States, then most of the preferences was more focused towards Europe, so it was sort of dynamically following the supply. They also had to be very fresh profiles, so if things are older than 2 days, they would not buy them in that sense, because then they're more likely to work. But then, somewhat more surprisingly, perhaps, the technical characteristics of the system, that of the user that was being impersonated, you can think of this as a kind of a social engineering attack, also mattered a lot. But that's also plays into the technical details of how impersonation as a service work as a model. But yeah, maybe that adds a little bit to what you said.
So sorry to keep on Miranda, but given previous SHBs, we've had some talk from people from criminology in areas of study of organised crime. I wonder how much contextualisation you've done of this work in previous work on non-cyber criminality and criminal society as a criminological concept.
Excellent question. So the research group that I'm a part of at Oxford is called CrimGov. It's a grant that is specifically focused on developing a new theory of organized crime. And it specifically notes that, well, it specifically argues that you need 3 elements for organized crime to exist, and that's trade, production, and governance. If you don't have those 3 elements, it may be crime that is organized, or it might just be crime, but it's not organized crime. So my work is part of, there's just most of the people in my research group look at traditional forms of organized crime, like drug smuggling and people smuggling. I'm part of just a few people who are looking at cybercrime. My work has mostly focused on the methodological side of things and collecting the data and analyzing it, and like I said, sending those hundreds and hundreds of emails to people who refuse to respond. So basically our approach is based on this kind of concept of organized crime as requiring these elements. We weren't specifically trying to draw out a new sort of definition of cybercrime as organized with this project. This is just a set of data that we need in order to conceptualize cybercriminality using empirical data, so that we can come up with a definition of cybercrime as organized. So basically, all of the much smarter people that I work with do exactly what you have talked about, and it informs my work, but I do focus more on the data itself at this point.
So Bob and Tyler.
I didn't have, I was scratching my head.
Okay.
Good thing we're not at an auction.
So my question's for Ben. Very interesting stuff you found. I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts about, what is sort of appropriate or not appropriate for governments to do? Because I know there are certain things that that private corporations can do that governments cannot. We're used to thinking about in the context of technology, like certain types of surveillance and these kinds of things. But this is now the use of very specifically targeted advertising for these public awareness campaigns. Like, what is there any sort of guiding set of principles of like what is sort of acceptable? Kind of icky, it's all terrible.
You couldn't do this in the U.S.
So.
They are. But yeah, so you are right.
I mean, I've met with DHS folks and all of them are constantly thinking about the Privacy Act and does doing this violate the Privacy Act? This almost certainly would.
The most similar thing they do. So yeah, essentially this is much more a UK and European phenomenon. We see an absolute ton of law enforcement, and actually across every policy area. The FBI do a little bit of it, largely targeting people that work in the Russian embassy. It's on the ad library, so you can find it. And actually, people live on reservations as well. But yeah, so in terms of propriety, I think what we do see is this, so I found one 16,000 of these. We've got a huge database of them now, essentially. We see a huge range of different approaches. So we do see some that are a lot that are like this, with these huge, often using ethnic or religious proxies, often using very, very detailed, very, very invasive forms of targeting. And I think that's pretty much never appropriate, particularly when it's law enforcement. I think law enforcement's a unique unique advertiser. It's the only advertiser that's allowed to kill you, basically. And that does
Quickly,
change.
there's liquor and cigarettes and
Sorry, yeah. It's only the one that's allowed to immediately kill you under the law. But yeah, and I think that really does change what you can do. And I think it's a radically different thing for law enforcement to be doing in terms of taking interest in what television you watch, trying to change your behaviour, change your culture. For my money, I think what is appropriate is fairly broad-based targeting, because it makes sense that you want to have local issues be addressed or whatever that might be. They should be open. They should be a part of a public dialogue, a public conversation. Almost no policy actor, almost no British-based digital freedom person even that I've spoken to is aware this is going on. There's been no conversations in Parliament about it. There's no legislation or really any strategy about it. It's essentially under the radar, and I think that democratic aspect is the really important thing. It should be something we're discussing as a society about what the future of law enforcement should look like and what is appropriate. So yeah, I totally agree. I think, yeah, not easy. Thank you.
Well, it's 3 o'clock. I'd just like to say your talk really helped me understand why I get such weird ads, because I like first-person shooters and feminism.